Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today going to a Grateful Dead concert. When I met my wife, pretty well instantly in fact, she told me that she was a Deadhead, or at least that she'd been a Deadhead. And she first started attending Grateful Dead concerts, I think, in her early to mid-teens. She saw a number of them. It was a large part of her life. She would travel, meet people, she had a dog who would travel with her, and this was a large part of her life, up until 1995, when Jerry Garcia passed away, and the Grateful Dead stopped touring. I heard just by chance from my wife that the Grateful Dead were going to be in town, that they were going to be playing, and did I want to go to a concert? And initially, based on the sticker shock of the price, I thought, maybe not. Maybe not this time. She described that usually there was a party going on outside the concert, and we could go to that party, and that might be an easy way of actually, having the Grateful Dead experience without having to pay a substantial price. And coming close to the concert, in fact, probably within the day leading to the concert, it became apparent that tickets were on sale for as little as $20. And when we investigated, we ended up paying about $40 each for our tickets. But I thought, well, we're up for it. Why not actually go and see what this thing is about? They're not going to be performing anymore. It's a great opportunity to see some aspect of my wife's life. And truth be told, I do own a few Grateful Dead records. I was never a Deadhead, never really into it, they never really toured Australia. But in terms of my general philosophy, in terms of the folks that I hung out with, and certainly in terms of my period of time in revolutionary encampment in Australia, I realised that it was probably good to go to a Grateful Dead concert and have a little bit of fun, I mean, few things identify me politically or ideologically in my general day-to-day life, but I thought, well, going to a Grateful Dead concert, that could be one thing. The morning began trying to secure the tickets. The tickets had been garnered through StubHub, which is just like a legal scalping site. No, it's a way that people who have tickets, perhaps season tickets, can just offload them for some nominal profit. Because the area around the concert was so packed with people, my wife nominated to drop me off to go get the tickets. I looked considerably more straight-laced than anyone, and she would drive around the block. When I presented my ID, they looked at me. They didn't quite say, well, you do know these are Grateful Dead tickets, don't you? But anyway, they passed on the tickets, and I left to try and find my wife. Wide variety of kind of carnival-like folk driving around and walking around, and just seemed like an upbeat atmosphere. When I was walking out with the tickets, I passed a gentleman who had accidentally dropped his credit card on the ground. And I called after him, "Sir, you've dropped your card." And he came back and he said, "You're from overseas, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, actually, I live here now." And he looked at me, perhaps because I didn't look like a Deadhead, he smiled, picked up his card, and kept on walking. However, by the time came for us to go and see the concert, I had put on my tie-dyed Noble Ape t-shirt that my wife had very lovingly created for me maybe 2 or 3 days earlier. And we headed off to the concert in an Uber, as one does in this part of the world. We couldn't find any of the festivities that my wife had originally talked about. In fact, what we found was probably, maybe 5 or 6 vehicles worth of people, some selling crystals, some selling t-shirts, these kind of things. In fact, the t-shirts were considerably more official, and there were a few interesting people wandering around, but really, it was a group of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Maybe even 70s and 80s in some cases. It was very quiet, very laid back. Not really what I imagined a kind of rock concert crowd as being. We were thoroughly frisked as we entered the Levi Stadium, which is named after the Pants folk. It's where the 49ers play. After they'd quizzed me associated with what my office pass actually did, I said, well, it gets me into my office. They let us in. And I proceeded to find our seats, where my wife went scouting for merch. In fact, this really saved a good portion of the concert, because my wife bought a hooded sweatshirt and a couple of t-shirts. I went, sat in my seat, and realised that we would be getting direct sunlight for probably about 5 hours until sunset. Thankfully, I'd put on some sunscreen, I'd worn a thick-brimmed hat, but it was still not really the weather to be in direct sunlight for this length of time. Our seats didn't face the stage. In fact, the stage was so far in front of us that really what we saw was when they came in and came out from the back area, and the wide variety of kind of scaffolding and manifold that held up the speakers and things like that. But I thought this is still a pretty good location. We had 2 huge flat screens that clearly were going to show us the concert at various points, and I sat in and made myself comfortable and watched the various bits of home movie footage that they had going. and quite a catchy loop that kind of kept playing, getting ready for the concert. The area that we were in was very sparsely populated. In fact, really, it was only until the last 10 minutes before the concert started before people started to gather around us, which was pretty hopeful. My wife came back. While I was waiting for my wife, or while I was waiting actually to get the seats, I bought 3 steamed pork buns, which I proceeded to eat very slowly. My wife is on a no-carb, no-gluten diet, so she wasn't going to be eating any of the pork buns. But I did buy extra water for her, which she proceeded to drink through the evening. The concert was really very fun. It was not amazing musicianship, not amazing vocals, not anything where I thought this is like unbelievable, but just through sheer endurance. They played for about 3.5 hours. They took about a 45-minute break. And the man of the match, as they say in Australian cricket scores, was a fellow called Trey, who turned out to be the leader of a group called Fish. He was, I think, 51, or he is 51, as he performed last night, and it was just extraordinary to watch this man play. He led the crowd a number of parts, and in general, with the remaining members of the Grateful Dead in their 60s and 70s, he provided a youthful energy that I think the audience was very receptive to. After the intermission, the kind of clouds came overhead, the sun set, and we were in for a very interesting experience because the clouds were very low to the ground. So it was really like we were in some kind of acoustic amphitheatre. On 4 occasions, planes came into land overhead, which was quite astonishing because some of them were flying about 500 feet or less. So, substantial sized thing, a Boeing 747 when it flies overhead like that. And certainly it added to the general excitement of the concert. I wasn't particularly interested in chemical substances. I wasn't particularly interested in psychedelics or anything like that in terms of like taking them. And really this is more for another short funk recording. But there was a vast quantity of cannabis smoked, and it made me appreciate that through my misspent youth, through surveying and understanding and going through areas, I realised that I could actually pick out the different strains of cannabis, or at least the broad distinctions between sativa, which smells like sandalwood, and indica, which typically is more sweet-smelling and typically has kind of like fruity aromas in it. And what surprised me was the quantity of like old strain sativa, which is just sandalwood or various kind of wood smells, and not really like the, I don't know, modern day medical cannabis that I smell so frequently kind of wafting in my bathroom window in the morning, as we live in a university area, and quite frankly, there's a copious quantity of medicinal cannabis consumed in our vicinity. It's hard to really put into words last concert, particularly when it's also your first concert, and it made me realise that I don't have enough fun in my life. Going and seeing the Grateful Dead, probably, I'm not sure whether there were 40 or 70,000 people there, it's kind of academic, but going and seeing a concert with tens of thousands of people, with a show centrally rigged, 100 feet high, clouds coming overhead, planes flying overhead, you realise an immense sense of the kind of sublime, but also a group emotion. That being there with tens of thousands of people enabled me to feel things that I could only feel with tens of thousands of people there. Kind of primate-esque. Truth be told, I didn't do a lot of dancing. I wore my work shoes. I sat down for good portions of it and just observed the musicians playing on the video screens. The computer psychedelic art was relatively unique, and what it made me realise was that clearly there were super specialised people in this field who worked very closely with the Grateful Dead. And I thought to myself, this is a unique experience. It needs to be, like, savoured. And that's really the way I took the evening. We got home just before midnight. We were able to get out. We were able to get an Uber home quite easily. And in terms of bookends to an experience, I feel changed by it. I feel a greater sense of appreciation for this thing that was so much part of my wife's life that unfortunately couldn't be part of my life. And also the sense that we probably need to start going to more rock concerts. We probably need to start following more bands. Because that energy, the energy of the crowd, the energy of what was going on, was really something that I want to be more a part of. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.